Okay, so we all know the basics about product liability, but did you know
Yeah.
that almost FUR products are recalled every single day in the US?
Wow.
That is crazy. And today we're going to be diving deep into this guide from Barnard Donegan Insurance to understand why this is happening and also like how you as a consumer can feel confident about the products that you're using every day.
Really makes you think about, like,
Yeah.
you buy something
Yeah.
and you don't really think about all of the hidden
Right.
decisions and regulations and all of that.
It's like a whole world
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a whole hidden world that you just don't really see.
And so this guide says that over 1,000 recalls a year are mandated by the federal government, but that doesn't even include like
Right.
voluntary recalls.
Wow.
So what is driving all these recalls? Is it like
Yeah.
more regulation or are companies just getting worse at it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that's something that the guide kind of explores.
Correct,
Is like
right.
the 2008
Yeah.
update to the Consumer Product Safety Act,
Oh, okay.
the also called the CPSIA.
Yeah.
So it really kind of strengthened like the
Wow.
power.
So there's like a whole government agency
Yeah.
dedicated to this?
There is, yeah.
Yeah.
The Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC.
Okay, and so what kind of power are we talking about here?
Well, I mean, they can impose some pretty heavy fines, up to $15 million for companies.
For one
Yeah.
company.
Yeah, for a company that doesn't comply.
Wow, that's it.
And also they empowered state attorney generals to actually halt sales
Okay.
of products that they deem
Yeah.
unsafe.
Okay, so that's a pretty big incentive to make sure that your product is
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm curious, does the CPSC cover like every single product?
Well, not really. It's not like a one size fits all. So like cars and
Okay.
all that equipment
Okay.
falls under the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration.
Oh, okay.
And the FDA handles food and drugs and cosmetics.
So I'm guessing boats are Coast Guard, pesticides are EPA.
Exactly.
Anything that flies is FAA.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of
Got a lot of other
different agencies.
Wow. I mean, it makes you wonder, like, how well they all coordinate.
It is a pretty complex web of agencies, but, the goal is all the same, which is to protect consumers from harm.
But what can go wrong with a product?
Yeah.
Like, what are the things that we should be looking out for?
Well, the guide breaks it down into 3 different categories. Design defects, manufacturing defects, and marketing defects.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like if you imagine a recipe for disaster, like if one of these ingredients is bad, then the whole thing is bad.
So can you give an example of each?
Sure. So like a design defect could be like a car that has a faulty braking system,
Oh, okay.
or a manufacturing defect might be a batch of medicine. Okay.
It's contaminated during production.
Oh, wow.
And then a marketing defect could be failing to warn users about a known allergy trigger in a food product.
So you're saying, like, even if a product is, like, well made, there could still be issues.
Yeah. Like, transparency is super important.
Okay.
So if they don't provide the information to make informed decisions,
Okay.
like, that could be an issue.
And the guide also mentions breaches of warranty.
Yes.
So can you explain, like, what those are?
So that's when a product is not necessarily, like, defective,
Okay.
but it doesn't live up to the promises made about it.
Oh, okay.
So, like, if you buy a waterproof jacket, but then it leaks in the rain,
Okay.
that could be grounds for a product liability claim.
So, okay, so it's not just about whether something breaks, it's about whether it does what it's supposed to do.
Exactly.
Okay, so are there different types of warranties?
Yeah, there's like express warranties and implied warranties. There's even one called the implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose.
Okay, so there's a lot to consider when it comes
Yeah.
to warranties.
Yeah.
But what can companies do to protect themselves from these risks?
Right.
Like, is it all about avoiding lawsuits or is it something else?
Well, I mean, lawsuits are obviously something they want to avoid, but it's more about
Right.
proactively building safety
Okay.
into every stage of the product's life cycle. So this guide lays out what they call a pyramid defense approach.
Okay, pyramid defense, what is that?
So you're kind of like building a fortress
Okay.
to keep those product incidents at bay.
And so proactivity is like the foundation.
Exactly, yeah. Proactivity is key.
Okay.
So it's about designing and manufacturing the products with safety as a priority,
Okay.
not just as like an afterthought.
Okay, so you start with a solid foundation.
Yeah.
And then what are some of the other layers?
So another important layer is having like robust contingency plans in place.
Oh.
So it's like a fire drill, but for product safety. So things like product testing,
Yeah.
accurate labeling and packaging,
Yeah.
and even using customer feedback to identify potential problems.
So even with the best preparation, things can still go wrong.
Right.
So is that where insurance comes in?
Exactly. Exactly. So this guide really, really emphasizes the importance of having product liability insurance and product recall insurance.
Yeah.
They're like two sides of the same coin,
Right.
protecting the company from different angles.
So I always get confused by this first-party versus third-party exposure.
Yeah. So first party is basically the company's own losses.
Okay.
So like recall costs or property damage, even business interruption. Third party is more about the injuries or damages to others.
So it's like if a consumer gets hurt.
Exactly.
Okay, so understanding those two types of exposure, it's kind of like safety or the lack of safety.
Right. Has ripple effects throughout the system.
Yeah. It's a web of interconnected responsibility.
But the guide goes beyond just explaining the problems. It also offers solutions.
It does.
Yeah.
So what are some of those?
So one of the solutions they suggest is having a strong product liability protection program in place.
Okay. And what does that look like?
So this program, it should really cover a wide range of areas, including product testing, quality manufacturing, accurate labeling and packaging, and even using customer feedback.
Wow. So that's a lot.
A lot.
It is a lot.
But I guess if you're a company that wants to avoid these issues, you got to put in the work.
It's not just about avoiding lawsuits. It's about protecting people.
Yeah. So let's break down this product liability protection program a little bit.
Okay.
What are some of the key elements?
Well, like I said, product testing is absolutely crucial.
You can't just assume your product's safe. You have to actually test it to make sure that it meets the relevant safety standards.
So are they testing like prototypes?
Yeah.
The materials, the finished product?
They're testing all of it.
Wow.
It's a lot of testing.
So what about the manufacturing process? How does that fit into?
Yeah, so quality manufacturing is another really key element.
Okay.
So companies need to make sure that their products are consistently made to the highest standards. That means high quality materials, well-trained employees, and really rigorous quality control checks throughout the process.
So it's not just about having a great design on paper. It's about making sure that that design is faithfully executed every single time.
Exactly.
And this is probably where documentation is super important.
It is super important,
yeah. Wow. Okay, and then there's the labeling and packaging, right?
Exactly.
So making sure that those are...
accurate labeling and packaging is super important because consumers rely on that information to make decisions about the products they buy.
Okay, so those warnings and instructions, they're there for a reason.
Yeah, they're not just for decoration.
Right. So how can companies proactively gather information from the people who are actually using their products?
Right.
Like, it seems like that'd be really valuable.
Yeah. So using that customer feedback is another really critical piece of a puzzle. So you need a system to collect and analyze customer complaints, feedback, even social media posts.
So they're using technology to do this.
Yeah.
Wow. But how do they actually make sense of all that feedback?
Yeah, it takes a combination of technology and human expertise.
Okay.
So there are data analytics tools that can help identify trends and patterns, but you need, people to actually interpret that data and make decisions about it.
So they're looking for like red flags, like any injuries, any unexpected product failures.
Exactly.
But they're also looking for more subtle clues, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. It's about proactively identifying and addressing potential problems before they escalate.
This is incredible. So what happens if a company's doing everything right, but they still get hit with one of these claims?
Yeah.
Where do they go from there?
So that's where the product liability insurance comes in.
Okay.
It can't stop an accident from happening, but it can help protect the company financially.
Okay. So it's like a
safety net.
Safety net for the company.
Exactly.
But does it benefit the consumer?
It does.
In any way?
Yeah, it does. Because if a company doesn't have insurance and they get hit with a big lawsuit, they might not be able to actually compensate victims.
Oh, okay.
But if they do have insurance, then the victims are more likely to receive compensation.
Okay.
So it protects both sides.
So it's a win-win.
It's a win-win.
Okay. And then there's product recall insurance.
Yeah.
How's that different?
So that's specifically designed to cover the costs
Okay.
associated with recalling a product.
Okay.
So if they discover a dangerous defect, this insurance can help get those products off the shelves and out of people's homes quickly.
And that can be really expensive, right?
It can be very expensive.
Yeah. So the insurance really helps them do it quickly and efficiently.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of the things that can go wrong. But what happens when a product liability claim actually arises?
Yeah.
Like, what are the key steps involved in handling those claims?
Well, the most important thing is to respond quickly.
Okay.
The longer you wait,
Yeah.
the worse it is.
Don't bury your head in the sand?
Exactly. Exactly. You need to face the problem head on and contact your insurer right away.
Okay. So contact your insurer.
Yep. What's next?
And then launch a very thorough investigation.
Okay.
And that involves both internal and external experts.
Okay.
The goal here is to understand what went wrong, how many people were affected, how much is this going to cost.
So it could be a pretty complicated...
That's a complex process, but the right legal and insurance support can make all the difference.
Okay. And what about consumers?
Yeah.
What can they do to protect themselves?
Well, the most important thing is to be an informed consumer.
Oh.
So read those product labels,
Yeah.
pay attention to the warnings, and research products before you buy them. And if something seems too good to be true,
Yep.
it probably is.
And if you actually have a problem with a product, what should you do?
The first thing to do is stop using the product immediately and then contact the manufacturer.
Okay.
If you've been injured, obviously seek medical attention right away.
Right.
And if you're considering taking legal action,
Definitely consult with a lawyer.
this is all really fascinating. I'm looking at products in a whole new light.
Yeah, me too.
So I guess we need to take a break and come back for part 2.
Yeah, for sure.
But before we go, is there one question that you think our listeners should be asking
Yeah, I think a good question is,
themselves?
do I trust this company to prioritize my safety?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll be back in a few minutes to continue our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Ready to keep exploring this world of product liability?
Absolutely. I'm starting to see everyday products a little differently now. Like, I never realized how much goes into making sure that my toaster isn't like a fire hazard.
Right. Like you said, there's a whole hidden world of safeguards. And speaking of safeguards, the guide lays out some great examples of strategies that companies can use to mitigate product liability risks.
Okay, I'm all ears. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think a great starting point is fostering a culture of safety within the organization. Okay. And that's not just, having rules on paper. It's about making safety a core value.
So it's not enough to just like have a safety department or a quality control team.
Exactly. It goes beyond that.
Yeah.
You really want to empower employees to speak up if they see something that could be a safety hazard.
That's so important. You don't want people to be afraid to report a potential problem.
Exactly. You want to encourage people to speak up and make sure that they're heard.
Okay, so fostering a culture of safety is a great start. What other proactive steps can companies take?
Well, having robust quality control procedures at every stage of the product lifecycle is really crucial.
So that's like having checks and balances to catch potential problems early on.
Exactly. You want to catch those defects early when they're still relatively inexpensive to fix.
Does that involve, like, documenting every single step?
It does, yeah. Every step of the process should be really well documented.
Wow. Okay, so documentation is key. The guide also emphasizes clear and comprehensive instructions and warnings to consumers.
Right. You need to make sure that those product labels and manuals are easy to understand.
Right. Those warnings are not there for decoration.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
They can actually be a company's best defense.
So it's about being upfront about potential risks.
Exactly.
Okay, what else can companies do?
Well, they also need to actively manage their supply chain. This means vetting suppliers, monitoring their performance, and making sure they're meeting safety standards.
So even if a company had great internal controls, they can still be liable for problems caused by their suppliers.
Yeah, that's a really important point. You can't just assume your suppliers are doing the right thing.
So it's not just a handshake agreement.
It's a much more involved process than that.
Okay, so we've talked about ways to prevent these issues, but even with the best prevention, claims can still happen. So what happens then?
Well, when that happens, the most important thing is to respond quickly.
Okay, so no burying your head in the sand.
Exactly. Exactly. Contact your insurer right away.
Okay, contact your insurer. What next?
You need to launch a thorough investigation.
Okay.
And that involves bringing in experts understanding what went wrong, the extent of the damage, and the potential liability.
That sounds pretty intense.
It can be, yeah, but having the right legal and insurance support can really help.
Okay, so switching gears for a moment. What can consumers do to protect themselves?
Be an informed consumer. Read product labels, pay attention to safety warnings, do some research before you buy things.
And if a consumer experiences a problem,
Stop using the product immediately. Contact the manufacturer and seek medical attention if you've been injured.
okay, so this has been super helpful. We've
Right.
covered a lot of ground here. But I was reading ahead in the guide, and I noticed a section on risk transfer programs.
Oh yeah, that's a really interesting aspect of managing product liability. It's about strategically shifting the financial burden of potential liability to other parties.
So, like sharing the risk.
Exactly. It's a way for companies to kind of protect themselves.
Okay, so how do they do that? What are the most common ways?
Well, insurance is a big one. Product liability insurance can provide protection if a company gets sued. But there are also other types of insurance that can be relevant.
So it's not just about having one type of insurance.
Right. Product recall insurance, umbrella liability insurance, those can be important too.
Okay, so that's insurance, but what about these contractual agreements?
Right. So companies can also use contracts to transfer risk.
Okay.
Like you might have an indemnification clause.
Okay.
That says the supplier agrees to reimburse the company for any losses that result from a defective product.
So if the supplier messes up, the company is protected.
Exactly. It shifts the responsibility to the party who can control the risk.
So it sounds like a good risk transfer program involves both insurance and contracts.
Absolutely. It's a combination approach.
And setting these programs up, that must be pretty complicated.
It can be, yeah.
Hmm.
It involves a lot of planning and legal expertise.
Earlier, we were talking about the importance of management's role in all of this. Does the guide talk about that?
It does, yeah. The guide emphasizes management oversight in building a culture of safety. They need to set the tone from the top down, make it clear that product safety is a top priority.
And they need to back that up with action, right?
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words.
What kind of actions are we talking about?
Investing in training programs for employees, implementing rigorous quality control, responding quickly to safety concerns, things like that.
So it's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk.
Exactly. It has to be a company-wide effort.
The guide also dives into vendor management.
Right, and that's a crucial aspect of product liability. Because these days, most companies rely on a complex network of suppliers and vendors.
And if one of those vendors messes up, it can affect the whole product.
Exactly. Even if the company is doing everything right in-house, they can still be held liable.
So vendor management is about making sure everyone in that supply chain is upholding those safety standards. And that involves
On-site audits, reviewing quality control records, requiring vendors to carry insurance.
okay, so it's a pretty involved process, but it's essential.
It is.
The guide also talks about prioritizing safety during the design phase.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things companies should be thinking about there?
Well, it's all about anticipating those hazards and designing them out of the product, conducting risk assessments, using the right materials, and following industry best practices.
So they're not just trying to create a product that works, they're trying to create a product that's safe, even if someone misuses it.
Exactly. They have to think about all the ways a product could potentially be used.
That's a lot to consider.
It is. And it requires a team effort.
So we've talked about design, manufacturing, vendor management.
Right.
What about the post-sale phase?
Right. The post-sale phase is crucial too. Companies need to gather feedback from customers, identify potential safety issues, and take action.
So they're not just selling a product and forgetting about it.
Not at all. They need to stay engaged, monitor how the product's being used.
So even after a product is sold, the company still has a responsibility to ensure its safety.
They do, and sometimes even a legal obligation.
It's incredible how much goes into this. The guide really goes into detail.
It does. It's packed with valuable insights.
We've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we really have. There's still so much more to explore, but I think we've covered the most important points for now.
Okay, so before we wrap up part 2, is there one key takeaway for our listeners? One question they should ask themselves about the products they use every day?
You know, a really important question is, do I trust this company to prioritize my safety? That's really what it all comes down to.
That's such a great point. Okay, we'll be back in a few minutes to wrap things up in part 3.
Welcome back to our deep dive on product liability risk. It really makes you think about all the things we use every day
It does, doesn't it?
and how there's this whole system behind the scenes
Right.
we never even think about.
Yeah, until something goes wrong. Exactly. And one of the things that stood out to me from this guide is how important it is for companies to be proactive.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. It's not enough to just react to problems.
Right.
You gotta be thinking ahead, anticipating what could go wrong.
So a shift from that fix it when it breaks
Right.
to,
Design it so it never breaks.
yeah, design it so it never breaks.
Yeah.
But that requires a commitment from everyone.
It does. It really has to be a
Yeah.
company-wide, top-down, everybody's on board.
It's got to be part of the culture.
It's got to be part of the culture, yeah.
So communication's also really important.
Right. Communication is key, both within the company
Right.
and externally.
So everyone in the company needs to be on the same page about safety procedures, potential hazards.
Exactly. No one should be afraid to speak up.
And then externally, the company needs to be upfront with the consumer about potential risks.
Right. Transparency is really important for building trust.
So speaking of consumer protection, can you remind us about the Consumer Product Safety Act
Right.
and the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act?
Yeah, so the Consumer Product Safety Act, or the CPSA, was enacted back in 1972,
Okay.
and it established the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC.
So they're like the watchdog.
Exactly. They set safety standards, ban hazardous products, and oversee those product recalls.
Okay. And then the CPSIA came later.
Yeah, the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act.
And what did that do?
That was in 2008, and it really strengthened the CPSC. It imposed stricter testing requirements, especially for children's products,
Okay.
and it created a public database of product safety incidents.
So that was a big step forward for protecting consumers.
Yeah, absolutely, especially for kids.
But those are just two acts, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole landscape of regulation
There's a whole world of regulation.
that companies have to navigate.
They do. Federal, state, local.
So that must be a lot to keep track of.
It is a lot, but there are resources out there to help.
Oh, okay.
Trade associations, law firms.
Okay.
So companies don't have to do it alone.
That's good to know. So we talked about how companies can prevent these claims, but they still happen, and the guide mentions some serious consequences.
They do.
Can you remind us what those are?
Oh, yeah. Financial losses, damage to your reputation,
Okay.
decreased consumer trust, product recalls, and in some cases, even criminal charges.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot, yeah.
So companies need to be really on top of this.
They do. It's really important to manage those risks.
Okay, so how can companies build that strong reputation for product safety?
Okay, well, I think first and foremost, make safety a core value.
Okay.
Invest in testing, in quality control, be transparent with your customers, and always be looking for ways to improve.
So it's really about going above and beyond just the bare minimum.
It is. It's about doing the right thing.
It's about doing the right thing, yeah. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for walking us through all of this.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, as consumers, we all have a role to play too. Be informed. Be vigilant.
And speak up if you see something that's not right.
Exactly.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Until next time, stay safe out there.